Harriet Nelson began performing in hazardous theaters at the age of 6 weeks despite America's perception of her as the ideal TV mother. Mobsters watched her dance at the Cotton Club. At parties, she cracked crude jokes. Since she was 13, she has smoked in secret. She had a violent and scandalous first marriage. She poured beverages and befriended those society shunned when the cameras stopped. The American Family Values educator was concealing information that might have ended her career. Everything changes when you hear her true tale. Harriet Nelson was on stage before she was old enough to hold her head up. She made her stage debut at the age of 6 weeks after being born, Peggy Lou Snyder in Des Moines, Iowa, on July 18, 1909. Her parents were traveling stock company actors, and they included their newborn daughter in the performance. It was a real role in a real performance, not just a fleeting cameo or a family photo opportunity. At the time, it was even mentioned in newspapers. It turned out to be one of the first known theatrical debuts for a baby in American theater history. It was more than just getting off to a good start. When Harriet was born, the family's life revolved around the stage. And she was raised in the spotlight with crowds observing her before she could speak. She began giving speeches on stage at the age of 3. She performed with her parents' stock firm for the first time in a speaking role. These productions weren't minor ones. The stock companies performed new plays every night, frequently with just one day of rehearsal, and they were relentless and fast-paced. Harriet needed to pick things up fast, immediately adjust and execute flawlessly in the presence of adults. She wasn't merely learning lines, though. She was able to keep up. People took notice. She was no longer a novelty. She was a true entertainer. Harriet continued to attend school in spite of the frequent trips. She attended the esteemed St. Agnes Academy, which had high academic standards. Her schooling, however, was unconventional. She remained rooted in her studies throughout the academic year. She traveled and performed during breaks. In order to allow her to continue attending school while performing on holidays, her parents meticulously arranged their travels. It required a great deal of self-control to strike that balance between theater and reading. Despite her youth, she was already juggling 2 lives, one under stage lights and one in classrooms. In 1925, everything changed. When Harriet's parents divorced, she was just 16. The family wasn't the only thing broken by the breakup. She was forced to choose between her dreams and stability, as well as between her father and mother. It was a difficult, agonizing time that coincided with her transition into maturity. Harriet, however, didn't wait for life to make a decision for her. She made her decision, leaned toward independence, and proceeded, without turning around. She grew up quickly because of that break. She was no longer merely a performer's child after that. She was turning into the celebrity. She took another risk 3 months before she was set to graduate from high school. She left to become a member of the Corps de Ballet at the Capitol Theater. That would have been reckless for most teenagers. Harriet, however, was aware of her desires. There was seriousness in the Capitol Theater. It was difficult to get into the ballet corps. She made the wise choice to exchange her degree for practical experience. She pursued live performing much more after receiving professional instruction. Although it was a gamble, it influenced the remainder of her career. Soon after, she was playing at the Cotton Club in Harlem, one of the most exciting and hazardous venues in New York. The late 1920s was the time. The heart of vice and jazz was the Cotton Club. Despite being in Black Harlem, it exclusively catered to white patrons. Legends like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Cab Calloway were among the black artists. Nevertheless, in the middle of it was Harriet. She performed every night in an environment full of mobsters, money, and music. Regulars included men like Dutch Schultz and Lucky Luciano, operating the club from behind the scenes while hiding in the shadows. It was both dazzling and perilous for a young woman, but she didn't bat an eyelid. She gained insight into the inner workings of show industry, from its bright spots to its shadowy nooks. She also developed a habit that would plague her for the rest of her life amid all the glitz and mayhem. She began smoking cigarettes at the age of 13. Smoking was common in those days, particularly in entertainment. You appeared more sophisticated, edgier, and older as a result. However, the harm began early. She would experience persistent lung problems, coughing spells, and breathing difficulties decades later. Her addiction was more than a passing incident. She was followed all the way to the end by a slow-burning tragedy. Harriet worked diligently behind the scenes, honing her art in vaudeville, while many performers sought recognition. With comedians like Burt Lahr and Ken Murray, she emerged as the straight woman in comic acts. She was brilliantly setting up the laughs, but she wasn't the one receiving them. It's not easy to get that timing. Lahr had outrageous energy and went on to play the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz. Harriet was the solid force that made their actions make sense. She counterbalanced it with composure. She kept going to the city, performing concert after show. Traveling constantly and performing several times a day made vaudeville hard, but she persisted and continued to improve. Then the big break arrived. The pinnacle of vaudeville was the Palace Theater in New York. You would have succeeded if you had played the Palace. In the 1930s, Harriet gave 4 performances there. Second chances weren't given out very often at that period. The crowds were rough. There were huge expectations. However, Harriet always delivered. Her name became increasingly well-known. Critics took note. Casting directors took note. The audiences returned. The next phase of her career was made possible by her performances at the Palace. From stock company toddler to vaudeville star, she had changed her appearance. When Harriet Nelson made the most significant error of her young life, she was just 21 years old. She wed comedian Roy Sedley in 1930. He was 9 years her senior, well-spoken, and already involved in New York's vibrant nightlife. They first met in the glitzy, dangerous, and music-filled Cotton Club. At the first, it seemed like a dream, but it quickly became a nightmare. Sedley pulled Harriet into a chaotic world and was violent and careless. Despite having grown up in the entertainment industry, she wasn't prepared for this darker aspect of life. The marriage was nasty in addition to being problematic. Sedley partied harder and drank more, and subjected Harriet to verbal and emotional abuse, leaving her permanently damaged. He was irritable. He was surrounded by hard-living buddies in show business. And in the midst of it all was Harriet, who was still a young lady. Fights, threats, and loneliness swiftly replaced the Cotton Club's dazzling lights. Sedley didn't lead a luxurious life. It was risky. And night after night, Harriet was experiencing it. After a year, she broke up with him, but she was still legally bound. 2 more agonizing years were needed for that. Even after their separation in 1931, Sedley continued to have influence over her life. Sedley was uncooperative, and the courts moved slowly. Harriet continued to perform despite being in legal limbo. She accepted any job that came her way. Vaudeville performances, dancing engagements, and straight female parts with Burt Lahr and Ken Murray as comedians. Despite the chaos behind the scenes, she had to smile on stage. She was unable to proceed. Not quite yet. In 1933, the annulment was eventually made. On paper it was over, but the trauma persisted. Something changed that year. Harriet, who was still legally married but emotionally unrestrained, met Ozzie Nelson, a saxophonist, in 1932. He was knowledgeable, composed, and everything Roy wasn't. Both on and off stage, they clicked right away. However, their alliance was contentious in the 1930s. Harriet's name was still Mrs. Sedley. She was performing, smiling, and falling for another man, but she didn't care about the rumors that quickly spread. Ozzie gave her a sense of security. She was hired by Ozzie to sing in his band. To escape her history, she adopted the theatrical name Harriet Hilliard. In large bands, the majority of female vocalists were background noise. Harriet wasn't. She was charismatic, vivacious, and in control. She became the focus of attention in a matter of weeks. She provided entertainment in addition to singing. She taunted the crowd, made jokes with Ozzie, and drew everyone in with her smile. By 1933, she was not only getting better, but also getting better. They got a job at the Glen Island Casino that summer. It was the ideal location. Radio transmissions that spanned America, affluent audiences, and high society visitors. The stage was illuminated by Harriet and Ozzie. The place was packed each night. Their names were getting out quickly. So everything about them clicked, their narrative, their music, and their relationship. This was no accident. Lightning in a bottle was what it was. Ozzie also noticed something else in Harriet. He began penning amusing duets specifically for her. Harriet received the punchlines in these sardonic, witty tunes rather than the usual romantic ones. She teased Ozzy on stage during one of their biggest hits, and then some. The audience adored it. She had more than simply a lovely voice. She was courageous, smart, and bold. It was uncommon. It was new. It was authentic. In the 1930s, women were not expected to respond in such a manner. Harriet did, and it appeared effortless. Everything, the new name, the laughing, the music, the sold-out performances, was leading to something greater. Harriet married Ozzy in 1935. It was different this time. No secrets existed. Just two individuals who had the same goals and understood one another. A family, a home, and a future based on trust rather than pain. There was more to the marriage than just love. It was steadiness. Harriet never had anything like it with Sedley, and it was evident. They were collaborating on radio within a year. They were well known by the late 1930s. Their accomplishments weren't accidental. It was gradually earned through suffering, danger, and second chances. RKO Radio Pictures signed Harriet Nelson to a one-year contract in 1936. She was a 27-year-old performer who had been on stage since she was 3 years old, having recently left Broadway and the nightclub scene. It was no little step to sign this deal in. Home to industry titans like Katharine Hepburn and Fred Astaire, RKO was one of Hollywood's best studios. The contract assured her of 3 movies and, if she was successful, the potential for more. She had decided that this was her moment to shine on her own, and it was the first significant move away from playing with Ozzy Nelson's band. She received a significant role in Follow the Fleet, one of RKO's most anticipated movies the same year. With Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire at the top of their game, it wasn't just any musical. Opposite Randolph Scott, Harriet portrayed the romantic lead, Connie Martin. Released on Valentine's Day in 1936, the movie made nearly $3 million and was a huge hit. Back then, that was a tremendous number. Audiences were captivated by her voice on-screen persona and effortless charm, and critics lauded her performance, particularly her connection with Scott. The movie, which featured Irving Berlin songs such as the timeless Let's Face the Music and Dance, helped solidify her reputation in Hollywood. She was now a true movie star and not simply a singer. The start of the 1940s and the onset of World War II caused Harriet's career to change once more. Hollywood needed musicals, light-hearted comedies, and feel-good stories to boost morale. And she was a fantastic fit for that design. She starred in a number of movies aimed at providing wartime escape between 1941 and 1944. She portrayed a college student attempting to use a musical performance to save her institution in Sweetheart of the Campus. She entered the mystery genre with Confessions of Boston Blackie, demonstrating her ability to handle both song and suspense. She got the lead in movies like Honeymoon Lodge and Jukebox Jenny, and she confidently carried each one. She frequently had several projects going on at once, which is uncommon even for well-known people. Working with her was a pleasure for the directors. She was trusted by the audience, and because she consistently delivered, producers continued to cast her. She accumulated almost a dozen film credits by the middle of the 1940s. She co-starred with Fred MacMurray in the 1938 film Coconut Grove, which told the humorous tale of a band attempting to become successful in Los Angeles. Because of her voice, she played a tutor who joined the band and ultimately contributed to their success. Although the movie wasn't a critical favorite, viewers adored it. She sang in a flurry of hilarious mayhem with Jukebox Jenny. Additionally, she appeared on TV alongside Ozzy in the seldom romantic comedy Honeymoon Lodge. Her CV was made more varied by her performances in Swing Time Johnny and Hi Good Lookin'. She did everything: romance, comedy, and music. She also did it frequently. During some of the most difficult years in American history, her name became synonymous with feel-good movies. Hollywood insiders were keeping a close eye on things behind the scenes. In addition to being a dependable celebrity, they believed she had the makings of a great. She had the talent, the voice, the beauty, and, perhaps most importantly, the aptitude for relating to characters on screen. She had acted alongside the greatest, including Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, and Fred MacMurray. By all accounts, she was on the verge of becoming a household name as her renown rose. Ozzie Nelson disclosed something that few people were aware of at the time in his 1954 book, My Life with Harriet. He and Harriet sincerely hoped she would continue to act. This was not an instance of a lady being ignored. Harriet desired to appear on a large screen. She was gifted. She was moving. Nevertheless, the couple decided to prioritize their family. The start of a silent sacrifice was signaled by that hard, shared, and infrequently acknowledged decision. The world around her, meanwhile, changed. The actresses she used to work with were becoming extremely famous while she was at home with her kids and managing the family. Judy Garland, Rita Hayworth, and Betty Grable all rose to fame. From the sidelines, Harriet observed, constantly speculating about what might have been. Knowing she had the talent and charisma to be right there with them, she subsequently acknowledged that it was a bitter experience. However, she had TAC meetings in place of premiere nights, and that pain, that silent what-if, never really left. Then, in 1944, things changed once more. Ozzie saw an opportunity to create something new once Red Skelton was drafted. He wrote Ozzie and Harriet's Adventures, a radio program that is solely about their family. The first time it was shown was on October 8, 1944. David and Ricky were initially portrayed by actors since the boys were still too little. However, the real children quickly took over. It was not merely a radio program. The company was run by a family. With Heinz and Listerine as advertisers, the show produced 402 episodes. It got popular, and it provided Harriet with a new platform that spread throughout American homes. The family was prepared for television by 1952. They took advantage of a deal that ABC had already signed that contained a TV adaptation option. The events that transpired were historic. Ozzie and Harriet's Adventures was the longest-running live-action family sitcom at the time. From 1952 to 1966, it lasted for 14 years. In real time, viewers witnessed David and Ricky's development. They even witnessed the guy's marriage. Indeed, their real wives also became part of the cast. Although it didn't have to be, the show wasn't a ratings monster. Consistency, tenderness, and the delusion that what viewers saw on film was real life were the foundations of its enduring appeal, and Ozzie took it a step farther to further solidify that illusion. On the studio set, he had every feature of their real home at 1822 Camino Palmero Street meticulously reproduced. The opening title showed the outside of the actual house. In keeping with the early American design of their house, the inside was constructed on a sound stage. In order to make the scene feel familiar, Harriet even contributed to its design. The audience had the impression that they were there with them. It was cozy and personal. And enduring. The show drew 20 million viewers a week at its height. Once a budding movie star, Harriet Nelson is now the embodiment of the ideal suburban mother. Composed, elegant, and in charge at all times. Millions of people thought that was her true identity. Off-screen, however, Harriet's life wasn't quite that tidy. She would get up at 6 in the morning, leave for the studio by 7, and return home to a housekeeper-prepared meal. Nevertheless, she maintained the image. The show was referred to as a mirage of the American way of life by both critics and fans. It was painless and pristine, exactly what America desired after the war. Harriet eventually rose to prominence as one of the 3 television maternity queens of the 1950s. Harriet Nelson was the gold standard, along with Jane Wyatt from Father Knows Best and Barbara Billingsley from Leave It to Beaver. She was not, however, performing a part like the rest. She was acting like herself, and that's what made it both so restricting and so powerful. Her television character gradually overshadowed her true self and her history as an actor and singer. America mistook Harriet Nelson for someone else. The real Harriet was completely different from the ideal TV mother who was shown smiling and subtly serving coffee in every episode. She was referred to as a bombshell by Emmy-winning director Peter Jones for her intensity as well as her appearance. She appreciated people who didn't fit into the narrow categories of the time, and she wasn't only kind and courteous. Jones claimed to like homosexuals. It wasn't common. Particularly throughout the 1950s, the majority of television showed no interest in the LGBTQ+ community. No, Harriet didn't. Although she accepted them in her private life, she kept it discreet. More about her was revealed by that one detail than by all the well-written screenplays combined. However, it didn't end there. Cardigans and cautious smiles weren't all that Harriet had to offer. She adored off-color jokes, Jones said, the sort of thing you wouldn't have heard on network TV in those days. She also enjoyed drinking cocktails at night. Cocktails, not wine. Cocktails, not wine. Harriet did that behind closed doors, and if you understood where she was from, it made perfect sense. Since she was 3 years old, she had been playing on stage and growing up in vaudeville. There were misfits, laughing, and turmoil in that realm. It was hers. A long time before she appeared on a sitcom set, she was an experienced performer by the time she met Ozzie Nelson in 1932. She didn't just adapt to domestic life once they were married in 1935. She made a cautious adjustment. She performed the character for the sake of the program. But she remained the fearless, witty, daring woman she had always been. Those close to her knew the reality, even when she was portraying herself on TV as the perfect suburban mother. She remained snarky and sharp behind the scenes. Before the cameras came along, Harriet was a Broadway dancer who performed with artists such as Bert Lahr and Ken Murray. In 1930, she even wed comedian Royce Sedley, but the union was dissolved 3 years later. Complex decisions were nothing new to her. She put her solo career on hold when she joined Ozzie's band. She did it to strengthen their act, not because she had to. Her personality, however, remained constant. It simply disappeared behind the curtain. Harriet was more capable than everyone knew. For more than 10 years, she changed who she was without ever raising any red flags with the public. Then everything was different. On June 3, 1975, Ozzie passed away due to liver cancer. He was 69 years old. Harriet lost more than just a spouse when he left. Her life's rhythm was gone. Years had passed since the show's conclusion. However, everything was still held together by Ozzie. Harriet distanced herself from the world after his passing. She ceased attending gatherings. She declined to be interviewed. According to her friends, she had changed. She grieved quietly at home. Biographer Michael Carroll claims that she never truly regained her feet. Her grief just grew more intense over time. Her son David Nelson was questioned about his mother's health in the early 1990s. He answered the question directly rather than sidestepping it. Ever since her father passed away, she has not been feeling well. That was about 2 decades after Ozzie's death, and she hadn't recovered yet. Even David, who had taken over his father's responsibilities professionally, was unable to calm her. By that time, Harriet was no longer entertaining guests or posing for photos. She seldom ever left her home. She only spent time with a select group of close pals, according to a 1992 article in the Los Angeles Times. It was nearly impossible to recognize the woman who had previously represented happy American parenting. And tragedy struck again just when it looked like things couldn't get much worse. Ricky, her youngest son, perished in a plane crash close to DeKalb, Texas on December 31, 1985. He was only 45. Ricky had been a household name, a pop star, and an idol among teenagers. Harriet was heartbroken. Ozzie was already gone. It was too much to lose Ricky. The collision had been forceful and abrupt. News quickly spread. Harriet, who was already withdrawn, became even more so. She kept the crash a secret from the public. She didn't appear on TV. She did not participate in interviews. She was broken, according to those close to her. She was at a loss for words. Harriet's fall, however, was more than just emotional. She was hiding something else, one which had gradually destroyed her health. When she was just 13 years old, she began smoking. Not many people were aware. She concealed it. After all, it wasn't what the ideal mother would do. However the behavior persisted, it dragged her down over the years. It ultimately resulted in emphysema. Her lungs became weaker. It got tougher to breathe. She was unable to walk far. She remained inside. The woman who used to dance on vaudeville stages was having trouble breathing. She continued to smoke in private even after that. Her disease had gotten too bad to ignore by the 1990s. She lived at the family's Laguna Beach house throughout those last years. There had once been a lot of activity there, including dinners with friends, music, and laughter. It was quiet now, the ocean and Harriet alone, as well as her recollections. Despite its warm light and expansive views, the mansion was unable to break the stillness. She was characterized by visitors as a shadow of the vivacious woman she once was. She hardly smiled. She spoke very little. She had no desire for company. She now hides in the house that was once a representation of love and success. On October the X-Saint 94, Harriet Nelson died gently for Harriet Nelson. She was 85. Congestive heart failure, disorder that impairs the heart's ability to pump blood effectively, was the cause. It is typical of elderly adults and frequently indicates that the body has finally reached its limit of fatigue. However, Harriet's passing wasn't dramatic or tragic. It took place while she slept at her Laguna Beach home, a serene conclusion in a setting that had grown to be her haven from the spotlight of Hollywood. She had portrayed the devoted and dependable mother in Ozzie and Harriet's exploits for decades. Even though that show ended in 1966, her memory and her legacy endured. The New York Times and Los Angeles Times referred to her as the perfect TV mother in their headlines as word of her passing spread. They were correct. In a society where the lives of celebrities frequently end in scandal or mayhem, hers ended peacefully. Just sleep, please, no fuss. Who was with her added to the poignancy of that occasion. David, her son. He had served as her companion, co-star, and connection to the past. David sat next to Harriet as she breathed her final breaths. He grasped her hand. Despite being brief and silent, the moment conveyed a lot. The cameras hadn't been the reason behind their friendship. It had been genuine all along. David's younger brother Ricky had died in a terrible plane disaster in 1985, years prior. In addition, Harriet's husband and lifelong companion, Ozzie, passed away in 1975. David was the last one remaining by 1994. He ensured his mother didn't pass away by herself. She wasn't in a medical facility. There were no strangers around her. She was with someone she loved at home. You may learn more about the Nelsons from just one information than from any television program. Following her death, Harriet was laid to rest in Hollywood Hills Forest Lawn Memorial Park. Hollywood celebrities are buried there, so it wasn't just any cemetery, such as Bette Davis, Lucille Ball, and Walt Disney. The most significant names there, however, were nearer to Harriet's home. She was buried with Ricky and Ozzie. They all three got back together. The Nelson family remained united even after death. For those who enjoy vintage television, their burial has become a silent landmark. People come to express gratitude, lay flowers, and recall a different type of fame, one that was heartfelt, secure, and familiar. They are now next to each other, silent but nonetheless present, after lighting up American living rooms for so many years, where the Hollywood world never truly ends.